welcome to the fourth episode of 400 Years Later. Today we are joined by Nina DeBoni, an English major with a poli-sci minor. Nina, would you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. I am a published poet, a connoisseur of dry British humor, and because it's topical in regard to Shakespeare text, I am an avid critic of all things considered classical.
And this is just a question I ask all of my guests. Why is it important to study Shakespeare even after 400 years? Or is it?
It definitely is. And for like a plethora of reasons, I actually kind of prepared a statement in advance because I think it's important due to its craft, as English scholars and theater analysts can easily track literary progression throughout the history, and due to Shakespeare's work ethic, he produced so much work that it's easy to trace that history and that progression. He also wrote so much that covers a variety of themes, particularly through his characters, and then the characters in and of themselves are just another reason why it's so important. Like, the writing of female characters in this time is very indicative of like social injustice, and then going into black characters and POC characters in general, Othello, that brings in a whole other realm of sociology and all of that wonderful, rich field of study. And in particular with Othello, we're going into stereotypes that are still prevalent today and still inform prejudices, and that's, one, unbelievable, but two, the fact that it was still present. It's very telling and very important to see where those stereotypes come from or how they were propagated, propagandized as well.
I totally agree, 100%. It's frustrating to see, honestly, almost parallels of some of these storylines occurring in our own world today, but that's honestly the reality of it.
Yes, it's very unfortunate 400 years later.
So to give a brief intro of Othello, Othello is about a black successful military general for the Venetian army. He marries Desdemona, who is the white daughter of a senator. And the tragedy begins as Iago, who is Othello's ensign, leads Othello to believe that his new wife has been unfaithful to him, with Cassio, who is a lieutenant in the military. Now Othello is hesitant to believe Iago, but once Othello sees Cassio with a special handkerchief he gifted Desdemona, he believes this falsehood to be the truth, and ends up killing Desdemona. All around a really sad and unfortunate ending. But so much of the scholarship surrounding Othello is just as much about the character Iago as it is about Othello himself, which is interesting. Like, he's one of those characters in Shakespeare that you just cannot ignore. Like I said earlier, he's Othello's ensign, which is like the lowest rank apparently in the military, and he was passed up for a promotion that Cassio earned instead, so he's a little bit of a jealous man. He's married to Amelia, who, again, is a source of his anxiety. He fears that she has been unfaithful to him with Othello. So those are kind of his two big motivations that I see. Nina, can you tell us a little bit about your own thought on why Iago is so scheming and ridiculously evil?
Absolutely, I can. So I think in a lot of the articles that I read in preparation for paper 2 in 394 hinted at like Iago's anxiety about Amelia having an affair with Othello is like one note. He brings it up maybe twice in the whole text. So a lot of emphasis is put on Iago's like being passed over for that promotion. And I, personally, and based off of a lot of evidence in the text itself and a lot of analysis done by Shakespearean scholars, think that while Iago is looking for a promotion, it's of a different kind. I think Iago may have some sort of deeper feeling for Othello, whether it be love, whether it be what have you. Either way, he's very deeply entrenched with Othello because all of his scheming ends up positioning him closer to Othello. Not necessarily as a lieutenant, as we see in the play. It takes a lot of build-up to get to that point. And it's only when he convinces Othello of the affair between Cassio and Desdemona do we get that promotion to lieutenant. And it's only seen between Othello and Iago. So it's a very personal, dare I say, marriage-like vow exchange of, I'm promising this to you, you're promising this to me. No one else is there, so there isn't a witness, but it's personal, and it's very almost romantic in the way that they're kneeling together. And so I think all the scheming just ends up putting Iago closer to Othello, possibly because he's in love with him. Who's to say?
No, I like that, and I think that actually ties in very closely and intricately with what my argument today is, and that's basically the dangers of playing God, the dangers of assuming you know someone's psychic state and you can predict their behavior. Which, come on, if you've ever fell in love, maybe you try to manipulate someone into falling in love, maybe you don't. I don't know. Anyway, the pursuit of love, I feel like intrinsically is related to, betting on somebody's mental state to be one way or another.
You're putting your best foot forward, and sometimes you're lying a little bit.
Exactly. But let's back up a little bit. So I want to talk about Iago's tactics in convincing Othello. Like, I really want to get into kind of that mental manipulation that we first kind of get a taste of in Act 3, Scene 3. And starting with line 92. Iago and Othello are alone on stage. And Desdemona and Emilia, their wives, have just left. And this is really the first opportunity that Iago plants the seed of infidelity in Othello's mind. And he asks, "Did Michael Cassio, when you wooed my lady, know of your love?" Othello: "He did, from first to last. Why dost thou ask?" Iago: "But for satisfaction of my thought, no further harm." Othello: "Why of thought, Iago?" And they go on forever and ever until Iago finally tells him his suspicion that Cassio and Desdemona are in love and having an affair. But it takes so long to get there, and it's so much of Iago being like, and Othello being like, "What are you thinking?"
Yeah.
So sly and manipulative, honestly. What do you make of that?
I mean, for my own argument of Iago's different type of promotion, I think it's in Act 2, maybe Scene 3. He's talking to Cassio, who has just been demoted after he started a drunken brawl. And Cassio's going on and on, like, "Oh no, my reputation." And Iago tells him, go and treat with Desdemona. She has Othello's ear. She's his wife. She doesn't. She doesn't have his ear. She, keeps hammering home to Othello, "When are you going to talk to Cassio?" And just keeps pushing it and pushing it. It's Iago that is slowly planting these seeds of, I don't want to say doubt, but I think it is doubt, because Othello, likely being a black man in a predominantly white area of the world in Venice, you're coming into this with all sorts of anxiety that we can't begin to unpack. So then you have what is his best friend, his not quite lieutenant, but in spirit, especially now that Cassio's been demoted, being like, "That's a little weird. That's a little fishy." So he's essentially just kind of gaslighting Othello into this whole different narrative and saying, I forget what the line was. It's later down in the same scene. It says, "My lord, you know I love you." He's literally just luring him in and then setting his whole world on fire. And
It is. I see Iago as this man above in the sky, pulling the strings of these characters, maybe not really knowing what's to come, is doing this, which makes me wonder, do you think Iago is successful in what he sets out to do? Could he have anticipated how the tragedy actually ends?
I think up until a certain point, I think it's when it goes back to the fake marriage, not quite marriage scene, where Othello is like, "I gotta kill this woman. I'm gonna do it with poison. I can't look at her in the face, or else I'll lose my nerve and I won't kill her, so I'm gonna kill her with poison." And Iago's like, "No, strangle her in her bed." That's where the crime of infidelity supposedly happened. And goes with it. And there's this weird part at the end of that play where he strangled Desdemona, but then she, like, not revives, but, like, comes back and, like, says, don't worry about it. It's fine. I was the guilty party here, which is a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. But the fact that Iago was saying, don't do it with poison, I think he was still trying, and that's, like, his last attempt to really take control of his scheming that's just spiraled because emotions spiral. And the fact that Othello didn't do it with poison kind of undid everything for Iago, because then it was like, oh, Desdemona died mysteriously. It became Othello killed Desdemona. He's right there. Amelia then was like, wait a minute. Iago was like, give me that handkerchief. And that undid everything. So I think, to a certain extent, he was successful because he got that promotion. But then he played too much of a long game where he outdid himself and could predict the emotions that fueled him to do the scheming that would then fuel the undoing that is the bloodbath of this ending.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And even just thinking about, like you said, his original intentions, and if there was any sentiments of love toward Othello, an ending where Othello is criminalized for murdering Desdemona offers no future for any potential relationship. And it just makes me wonder, in his pursuit for revenge and whatever else, Iago kind of loosens his grip on Amelia, and she is the one who, in the very end, reveals him for who he truly is. And I'm sure he was thinking to himself, man, if I could just shut this woman up. He had to have been thinking that.
Yes, I think that, because in my second paper for 394, I talk about Amelia because she's so underrated. She is the sleeper agent that undoes everything. And I think that's because he doesn't hold any pretense with her. Like, he is 100% deliciously devious. He's like, give me that handkerchief. I need it for my schemes. And she, of course, he doesn't outright say that. But it's like, I wonder what my husband's doing with this. Like, he's obviously doing something, and she's aware of it. She's the final piece, and she knows Iago is this dastardly dog, and undoes it all.
Dastardly dog. I love that. Yeah, so I feel like that's really kind of where the nail in the coffin is for him, is he doesn't predict the behavior and thoughts of everyone, especially Amelia, and that's where his work is undone. Which kind of is a nice transition to considering the tragedy in events of today. So, getting inside someone's head is akin to, like, playing God. And it may seem innocent. I mean, we were talking earlier, I for sure played Sims as a kid. I was more of a virtual family person. I don't know if you're familiar.
I am not, actually.
It was super lame.
Okay.
Basically, the point is you get to build this virtual world where you control characters who have emotions and they react in certain ways and have all these interpersonal relationships that result in consequences. You build a family, your neighbor hates your sim, whatever. But basically you're acting as God. You're controlling characters on the screen. But honestly, that's not much different from what Iago is doing in Othello. And it's not much different either to what the U.S. military is doing in what they call Project Iago. So 9/11 obviously was a turning point in America in a number of areas, right? Who would have thought it would be a turning point for how we think of Iago from Othello? But it was. And Marjorie Garber, an English professor at Harvard, wrote her book, Shakespeare in Modern Culture, and in it she briefly mentions Project Iago and how the character of Iago was transformed from this insider to like this dangerous foreigner who. So she briefly mentions it, and basically, Project Iago was an integrated asymmetric goal organization computer system that was built to calculate thoughts and behavior. It was based on Ramzi Youssef, a participant in the 9/11 attacks. And obviously it was named Iago after the Shakespeare character because, again, the whole goal of the computer software is to get into the mind of terrorists and predict how they might behave in the future, which is a whole problem in itself. But an article by Jeffrey Rothfed, Terror Games, explains that the U.S. military spent $100 million on determining whether these models can actually be helpful in war. Is that not the same as playing God? And aren't there huge faults in a system like that? The Rothfed article talks about the developer for the computer software, and even though he defends how every agent in the world is deeply researched, based on evidence, no bias, supposedly an accurate representation of the globe we live in, you can't help but wonder, is that really bias-free? Is this not just a guessing game? Rothfed's article says the goal is to merely inform policymakers' choices, but still, can't we learn from Iago that playing God maybe is not the best way to, make military decisions that impact real people? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I feel like, I'm using a tangent here, but in like every sci-fi movie, there's always that one human character, whether it be an android takeover movie, an alien movie, whatever, where it's like, oh, we've been analyzing human behavior, we know how this works. There's always one human, and it's typically the protagonist, that is like, actually, you don't, and then proves everything wrong. So I feel like the fact that we've gotten to such a weird, borderline dystopian point where we're trying to figure out how our brains work, of course that's like a wonderful, wonderful field of study, and it's important to understand why we work the way we do. But to be like, oh, they did this, or they had this for dinner, so they're going to do this. Like, obviously that's extreme, but like, we're wild variables. We have so much going on internally, whether it be psychosomatic, whether it be emotional, whether it be chemically. Like, there's so much happening in just in an individual's body and mind. There's no way that one polling that many people is going to be biased. Like, it's going to be biased for sure. There's no way. And to be so secure in that prediction, but bringing it back to the text, Iago had established the pattern of behavior of Othello. Like, he's able to manipulate. I can do this. He did do it not with poison. He didn't do it with poison. That ended up being his downfall, essentially.
And I mean, all of that is obviously from the early 2000s, dated now, but the same applies today. A New York Times article by Eel Press found that since 2010, U.S. drone strikes have killed between 751 to a little over 1,500 civilians in 4 different countries. And those numbers obviously are only increasing. That was published in the midst of the Trump administration, and kind of said, Obama really escalated the drone strike program, and Trump did even more so. And it's heartbreaking because the article also mentions one of pilots who, is based in office in Virginia, and he is the one helping launch these missiles around the world. And in one part of the article, it briefly mentions how sometimes all you see is a grainy gray picture, and you're not even sure who the individual is, but it's guesswork. And based on other information, you assume that's a person that needs to die. And the article talks about how mentally and emotionally draining that is on the person. Even though they're not actually engaged in hand-to-hand combat, they still suffer from PTSD. And the thought of dropping missiles from a sky, how much more can that get to being a god, right? launching things out of the clouds that have real consequences, and if you make any mistake, there's someone innocent dying. I mean, whether or not they're ethical to begin with for, guilty people or terrorists is one conversation, but innocent people, definitely not, right? And so it just, how can we stop wanting to get into the minds of people? And I feel like with virtual reality and everything and technological advances, maybe we're just down a bad path. I don't know. That's pessimistic.
I mean, yes, pessimistic, but based off of, just how prevalent everything in this realm is, and sadly, probably a bit more realistic as well, going back to the drone strike stuff, I think the mindset they go into that program with is, we're stopping more harm being done by doing little harm, which, sure, if we're getting into ethics, alright, but you're also prolonging a war, or starting a war that hasn't happened yet in this, hopefully, preemptive treatment of sorts, a preemptive drone strike, that's, no, I'm sorry, that's just ridiculous, especially when you're basing it off of human behavior, and there's some variable to change.
Right. It feels like we've learned nothing from Iago.
It really, unfortunately, does.
Whether it comes to manipulating your buddies, or trying to trick someone into loving you, or playing Sims, or launching missiles, it seems like playing God is never really a good idea. Unless it's The Sims. That can't be fun.
Yes. Let's try not to do that.
Yes.
Just, in everything you do, if you're being a little manipulative, that's alright. But if it becomes, this type of level where you're, playing some sort of weird little game with people, those are lives.
I agree 100%. There's so much we can and should learn from Iago. It's not healthy, productive, or even successful sometimes to try to pull the strings of other people's minds. And predicting behavior and predicting thoughts isn't as easy as one might think it is, and it can have devastating consequences. So just, I guess, avoid it at all costs.
Yes, absolutely. Otherwise, Othello's text, it's not going to end very well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Nina, I thank you for joining me today. I feel like this was a very interesting conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course, anytime. Thank you also to Professor Diaz. Next week, you can look forward to listening about King Lear. As always, thank you for listening, and have a good week.